Hello, and welcome. You found your way to Sad History for Sleep, where we take long, slow walks through the quieter corners of our collective past. If you're new here, we invite you to gently press the like button, subscribe for more journeys into history, and share with us, in the comments, where in the world and what time of night or morning you're listening from. It helps us connect, quietly, across time zones and stories. Tonight, we'll drift back, not so very far, but into a world that might feel distant all the same. A world of shadows and silence, of watchful eyes and whispered fears. We're going to explore what it was truly like to live under the rule of Saddam Hussein. For many, Iraq brings to mind images of war, deserts, oil, and headlines flashing across television screens. But behind those headlines were people, millions of them, living their daily lives under a regime that held its grip through fear, loyalty, and ever-present surveillance. In this journey, we won't begin with war or politics. We'll begin with the rhythm of everyday life, with cues, with ration books, with cautious conversations under flickering lights. So, if you're ready, make yourself comfortable. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slow, and imagine yourself in Baghdad in 1987. Imagine a morning in a quiet residential quarter of Baghdad. The sun rises slowly through a haze of desert dust and petrol fumes. The air is warm, even at dawn. A fan ticks gently in the corner of a modest flat. Water drips from a tap that doesn't always work. Outside, the streets are already humming. You hear the distant rumble of trucks, a clatter of pots from open windows, the soft rhythmic sound of a mother sweeping sand from a concrete doorstep. In these moments, before the heat takes full hold, the city breathes a little easier. But then, the queue begins. In Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the queue is a fact of life. For bread, for rice, for kerosene, for soap. You stand under the sun, ration book in hand, a dog-eared ledger of survival. Each stamp marks a permitted portion, and the rations rarely last until the end of the month. People do not complain aloud, not really. A sigh, perhaps. A knowing glance. Words, when shared, are wrapped in euphemism, in vagueness. Everyone knows that words carry weight, some words too much. There are slogans on every wall, paint slowly peeling from once bright murals of Saddam in military dress. A father, a warrior, a philosopher. In every shop and school his portrait watches, the same stoic gaze, slightly downcast as though surveying his people. Some shopkeepers tuck the picture away behind the register. Others display it proudly. It's hard to tell who truly believes and who simply survives. The radio crackles with patriotic anthems. Announcers speak with brisk authority. There is always good news, victories, projects, speeches. The hardships of daily life are not mentioned, not officially. At night the streets dim early. There are curfews. Children know not to ask why. A truck passing after dark draws curious, then cautious, attention. Lights behind curtains are switched off quickly. If there's a knock at the door, it isn't answered right away. The rhythm of life is dictated not by personal plans, but by the quiet, stifling weight of control. Power cuts are frequent. Families sit in the dark, sometimes speaking, sometimes just sitting. Waiting for the lights to return, waiting for the heat to lift. In the kitchen, mothers make do with less. A stew stretched with more water, a sweet made from what remains in the cupboard. The flavours of memory, spiced with nostalgia and loss. Children are taught patriotic songs at school. They draw pictures of flags, of soldiers, of Saddam's face. Teachers speak carefully. Lessons avoid uncomfortable history. And when a child slips up, repeats something heard at home, a silence often follows, heavy, alert. The call to prayer echoes through the neighbourhoods. It's a familiar anchoring sound. Yet even the mosques are not beyond the regime's reach. Imams walk a careful line. Too much zeal is dangerous. Too little, suspicious. In the countryside, the picture shifts. There are fewer eyes, but also fewer comforts. Roads are cracked, supplies sparse. But still, the fear travels. It arrives in official cars, in men in uniform, in rumours that never leave the air. And yet, amid this, life goes on. Weddings are held, babies are born, elders share stories over tea. The human spirit, quietly defiant, finds ways to endure, not loudly, not rebelliously, just enduring, like a candle that continues to burn in a shuttered room. And so, imagine yourself again, under a sky that carries both sun and ash. A marketplace bustling not with joy, but with necessity. A city where every radio, every wall, every classroom echoes a single name. The rhythm of life in Saddam's Iraq was not loud, it was not fast, it was a rhythm of survival, of knowing what not to say, of always looking over your shoulder. But now, let us step back and ask, how did this world come to be? How did one man rise to command such silence? To understand the stillness of daily life under Saddam, one must first return to the noise, the chaos and calculation, from which his power was born. So now, imagine yourself not in a queue or a quiet flat, but in a boardroom thick with cigarette smoke, a meeting of men, serious and certain, plotting the future of a nation behind closed doors. The year is 1979, the place is Baghdad. The man at the centre of it all is Saddam Hussein. But Saddam's story does not begin there. He was born in 1937 in a village near Tikrit, a dusty town on the banks of the Tigris River, steeped in tribal loyalty and long-standing grievances. His early life was marked by hardship, an absent father, a violent stepfather, a deep hunger for respect, power, and place. As a boy, he was quiet, but watchful. Those who knew him remembered his silence and his eyes. He would carry both traits into adulthood and wield them like weapons. Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party, a pan-Arab political movement, as a teenager. It offered something intoxicating: vision, ideology, and vengeance. He would later take part in an attempted assassination of Iraq's then president. The plan failed, and Saddam was wounded, then exiled. But even in exile, he maneuvered. He learned. He studied Stalin. He read history not for wisdom, but for tactics. And when the Ba'ath Party finally seized power in 1968, Saddam was ready. At first, he worked behind the curtain, not the face of the regime, but its architect. He created institutions, expanded surveillance, built a network of loyalty and fear. When the moment came in 1979, he did not seize power in a frenzy. He walked into it, as if it had always been waiting for him. In July of that year, he called a meeting of party officials. It was meant to be routine. Instead, it became a ritual of terror. One by one, names were called, accusations of disloyalty. Men were dragged out. Some wept. Others screamed. All were executed. It was a performance and a message. From then on, Saddam ruled alone. He built a state around his image: father, saviour, sword. Statues rose, streets were renamed, history was rewritten, the past was repainted, always with him at the centre. His biography was taught in schools alongside myths of greatness. His portraits became omnipresent, and those who failed to show proper reverence were quietly removed. But power, as always, demands more. In 1980, Saddam made a fateful choice. He invaded Iran, believing it would be a swift and glorious campaign. Instead, it unravelled into 8 years of brutal trench warfare. The Iran-Iraq War became one of the longest, deadliest conflicts of the 20th century. Hundreds of thousands died. Millions were displaced. The economy bled. Yet through it all, Saddam presented victory. Always victory. He wore military uniforms, though he rarely saw the front lines. He posed with rifles, with soldiers, with smiling children. Propaganda painted him as Iraq's lion. But beneath the roar was desperation. At home, dissent was crushed. The Mukhabarat, his secret police, expanded. Prisons overflowed. Torture became routine. Families vanished overnight. Their homes sealed, their names erased. The regime operated like a whisper, everywhere yet unseen. Even ministers lived in fear. Even allies looked over their shoulders. Then, in 1988, Saddam turned his wrath inward, toward Iraq's Kurdish minority. The Anfal campaign began. Entire villages were wiped from the map. Chemical weapons darkened the sky over Halabja. Thousands perished, not as soldiers but as civilians, women, children, elders. The ground itself was poisoned, and still the silence persisted. By the time Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990, his grip on Iraq was total. The world watched in horror and then retaliated. The Gulf War brought bombs, sanctions, and global condemnation, but within Iraq, he remained unshaken, or so it seemed. His speeches became more defiant, his palaces more opulent, his punishments more swift. He created more doubles, men who looked like him, walked like him, waved like him. They stood in for him at public events, confusing would-be assassins. For many Iraqis, it felt like he was always present, on every street, in every broadcast, in every thought. The rise of Saddam was not a sudden storm, but a slow eclipse, one that darkened the skies gradually, until the light seemed a memory. And so, as we leave this chapter, take a breath. Let it be soft. We've seen how a man carved a nation in his image. But what of the land itself? The ruins that whispered stories long before Saddam's voice filled the air? Let us now turn to a quieter, older mystery, one that he, too, tried to claim. Now, imagine yourself walking among the scattered remnants of an ancient world. The heat of the Iraqi sun lies heavily on your shoulders. The air hums with silence. Under your feet the sand is fine and warm, dusting the tops of half-buried bricks. Ahead, broken columns lean at odd angles and cuneiform etchings hide within crumbling walls. This is Babylon, or what remains of it. Once, this place was the jewel of Mesopotamia, a city of splendor, myth and memory. It was said that the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, grew here, their green terraces cascading like waterfalls in the desert. Kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II ruled from this soil, and through it time flowed like the Euphrates itself, long, winding and deep. But by the 20th century, Babylon had long since turned to ruin. That is, until Saddam Hussein turned his gaze upon it. To Saddam, Babylon was more than an archaeological site. It was a symbol, a reflection, a past he could resurrect to legitimize his rule. In the 1980s and 1990s, amid war and repression, he poured money, labour and limestone into a sprawling reconstruction of the ancient city. He didn't just want to preserve history, he wanted to inhabit it. The project was vast and meticulous, or at least appeared to be. New walls were built atop the old ones. A grand palace rose nearby, modelled after Nebuchadnezzar's own, but bearing Saddam's touch. Thick bricks, carved with inscriptions, each reading the same line, over and over again. In the era of Saddam Hussein, protector of Iraq, Babylon was rebuilt. There it was. History, rewritten not in books but in clay. He had his name stamped into the very foundation of the city. For archaeologists it was troubling. The authenticity of ancient structures was obscured. Layers of time overwritten. The original lines between past and present, king and tyrant, blurred beyond repair. But for Saddam, the symbolism was irresistible. He held lavish ceremonies within Babylon's new walls. Soldiers in ancient dress marched in unison. Massive portraits of Saddam and Nebuchadnezzar were hung side by side. Visitors from abroad were brought here, not only to see ruins, but to feel the narrative, that Iraq under Saddam was the heir of greatness, that he was the torchbearer of civilization. In truth, many Iraqis saw it differently. The reconstruction of Babylon was a quiet contradiction, a show of pride amid national suffering. While families rationed food and whispered under their breath, the regime poured untold resources into staging the past. The ancient bricks glowed beneath artificial lights, even as neighbourhoods in Baghdad sat dark. Still, the ruins stood, silent, enduring. Some say the spirits of Babylon could not be fooled, that even in restoration the site remained haunted not just by time, but by misuse. Others say that Saddam's efforts, while egotistical, kept the world's eyes on a place too easily forgotten. Even now, long after his fall, the scars of that reconstruction remain. The modern bricks, the palace on the hill, the echoes of marching boots. They blend uneasily with the whispers of antiquity, and perhaps that is Babylon's most enduring legacy, a city of layers, of glory and ruin, of myth and reality, of kings who built and those who imitated. As you step gently through the dust, the weight of time wraps around you like a warm shroud. The wind moves softly through the ruins, as if breathing the names of those long buried. The old city rests, unmoved by ambition, unshaken by performance. It waits, always, for silence. And so, from this place of ancient stone, we will now drift once more into the present, not the world of monuments or myths, but into glittering halls of another kind. Opulence, wealth, fear in silk clothing. Let us now enter the rarefied spaces of those who lived very differently under Saddam's rule. Imagine now that the dust of Babylon fades behind you. Instead, you find yourself in a grand reception hall. The air is cool, unnaturally so, cooled by imported machines even as the power flickers elsewhere in the city. Chandeliers shimmer above your head, gilded frames line the walls. Beyond tall windows, manicured gardens unfold in quiet symmetry. You're no longer among the ordinary, you're among the chosen. These were the privileged few, the inner circle, the favoured families, the golden elite of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. While most Iraqis stood in ration lines, these select few dined on imported delicacies. While blackouts swept neighbourhoods, their homes glowed through the night. Their lives moved to a different rhythm, one choreographed by power, proximity, and absolute loyalty. Their children attended private schools, often taught in English or French. Their wives wore the finest silk from Damascus, Amman, and Paris. Their sons drove German cars through streets patrolled by bodyguards. And all of it, every luxury, every escape, was made possible not just by wealth, but by allegiance. To remain in Saddam's favour was to remain untouchable. But even within that privilege, there was tension. You see, comfort in Iraq's elite circles was never unconditional. It was borrowed, conditional, a prize, and a trap. The closer one stood to the throne, the more dangerous the fall. Smiles were worn like masks, every gesture, every word measured. Imagine a dinner party in one of Saddam's palaces, a long table dressed in silver. Music plays softly from hidden speakers. Waiters, dressed in crisp uniforms, glide between guests, pouring tea or imported wine depending on the company. Conversations hover just above a whisper. Laughter is polite, controlled, and when Saddam enters the room, or one of his sons, everything stills, if only for a moment. Uday Hussein, Saddam's eldest son, was known among these circles for his unpredictable cruelty. Lavish, erratic, violent. He threw parties that began with toasts and ended in silence when a wrong look or misplaced comment shifted the air. He had a habit of taking what he liked. Whether it was a car, a home, or a person, his power was unchecked. And so, fear dressed itself in luxury. Qusay, the younger son, was quieter but no less dangerous. He controlled the Republican Guard, the intelligence services, the gears of repression. If Uday was the lightning, Qusay was the still, oppressive heat before the storm. Those in Saddam's social orbit knew this well. Their palaces were beautiful, but they were also cages. Surveillance reached even into the marble walls. Staff were often informants. Phones could be tapped. Even a private sigh might echo in the wrong ear. And yet, life among the elite was not devoid of joy. There were concerts, arranged discreetly, art collections displayed in hidden wings of grand homes, fashion shows held behind closed doors. There were weddings of extraordinary splendour, gold leaf invitations, towering cakes, orchestras flown in from abroad. For a few hours the world outside could be forgotten. The contrast was striking. While the average Iraqi family boiled rice in dark kitchens and hoped for electricity, the elite soaked in marble bathtubs under golden faucets. While books were censored and writers vanished, these circles shared imported novels and debated French poetry over brandy. But even here, in the inner sanctum, no one was truly safe. Power in Saddam's Iraq was not a stable platform. It was a shifting tide. Ministers disappeared, generals were retired without notice. Or worse, friendships ended overnight, erased not by disagreement, but by decree. A sun might rise on one day and fall the next. And so the privileged learned to perform. They danced a delicate waltz, one step in public loyalty, one in private silence, always aware of the watching eyes, always careful not to speak too freely. In these golden halls the walls listened too. Today, some of these palaces lie in ruin, others have been repurposed, but in memory they remain suspended in their opulence, glittering and cold. Reminders not just of wealth, but of what it cost. And now, let us leave this hush of velvet and crystal behind. Beyond the palaces, beyond the privilege, there existed another kind of silence, one shaped not by luxury but by fear, a silence that seeped through neighbourhoods, clung to the edges of conversation, and turned neighbours into ghosts. Let us now step softly into that quiet, the one filled with whispers. The sun has dipped below the horizon now. Picture a neighbourhood street in Baghdad. The pavement still radiates the heat of the day. The houses stand close together, their walls worn smooth by dust and time. A faint breeze carries the scent of old stone and still air. Curtains sway gently in open windows. Children's laughter has faded. A light switches off, then another, and then silence. But it is not the comforting silence of sleep. It is the silence of watching, of listening, of knowing that even here in your own home you're not alone. This was the Iraq of whispers, a country stitched together by suspicion and silence. Under Saddam's rule, the Mukhabarat, Iraq's feared intelligence and secret police, had grown into a vast shadowy force, invisible, yet ever present. They had many names: general security, special security, military intelligence, but to most Iraqis, they were simply them. It was said they could hear through walls, that they had informants in every office, every school, every market stall, even in family gatherings. A cousin, an uncle, a brother could be watching. The fear was not only that someone was listening, but that anyone could be. Conversations became choreography. Words were chosen carefully. Phrases softened into suggestion. People spoke in code, vague references, blank spaces filled in by shared understanding. Jokes became dangerous. Complaints, lethal. Even children were hushed. A passing sentence spoken in innocence at school might be repeated to the wrong person, and once spoken, it could not be taken back. Imagine yourself in a small living room. The television plays softly. State news, always. Saddam's face appears often, sometimes smiling, sometimes stern. No one dares change the channel. Even if you're alone, it feels risky. A neighbour might hear, a cousin might visit. You watch, not out of interest but necessity. The phone rings. You answer, voice steady, casual. You don't ask questions. You don't speak names. If someone knocks at the door late at night, hearts race. A glance is exchanged. The knock repeats, and everyone wonders, is this it? Some people vanish this way, quietly, without warning. They were taken in the dark, their homes left in stillness. The next morning no one would mention them. Their names became ghosts too dangerous to speak aloud. Those who survived learned the rhythm of fear. They smiled when told to smile, clapped when expected to. They displayed portraits of Saddam in their homes, even if the gaze of those eyes unsettled them. They memorized slogans. They kept their heads low, and when they spoke, it was only to trusted ears, and even then not fully, whispers, always. And the Mukhabarat were not faceless men in distant offices. They were everywhere, in uniform and out of it, in the next apartment, in the cafe, in the schoolyard. Some were ordinary citizens who had been coerced, blackmailed, or seduced into reporting. Others volunteered, seeking favour, safety, or the illusion of power. The machinery of fear was self-sustaining. When everyone is afraid, everyone pleases everyone else. When everyone suspects, no one dares. And still, life went on. People married, children were born, tea was poured, but the silence remained, a constant undertone, a reminder that in Saddam's Iraq, privacy was an illusion. The state watched and remembered. Even laughter, when it came, had a fragile edge. And so, under the soft flicker of the television screen, with curtains drawn tight and voices lowered to murmurs, people endured. Their resilience was quiet, cautious, and hidden in plain sight. As you drift through these memories, these shadowed rooms and muted voices, let the quiet carry you forward to the next generation, to the children who grew up beneath the portrait of a man they were told to revere, before they could even speak his name. Where there are walls, there are classrooms, and where there is silence, there are always young voices learning how to speak within it. In Saddam Hussein's Iraq, children were not spared from the state's watchful eye, nor from its embrace. The regime understood that to control the future one had to begin with the minds of the very young, and so the indoctrination began early, gently at first, A song here, a slogan there. A painting hung above the blackboard, Saddam's portrait, often larger than life. Imagine yourself sitting at a wooden desk. The sunlight spills across the room in soft stripes. A teacher stands at the front, pointing to a chalkboard. The children sit upright, their uniforms neatly pressed, their notebooks open. On the pages, not just arithmetic and grammar, but phrases to be memorized. Our leader, Saddam Hussein, protects us. We are the sons of Iraq. We are the soldiers of the Ba'ath. Every textbook was a mirror, reflecting the image of the regime. History was rewritten, reshaped, reimagined. In this version of the past, Saddam was always victorious, always wise. His enemies were traitors, his critics, cowards. The heroes of Iraq's history, even those long gone, were recast in ways that made them echo his strength. Even art was a tool. Children drew pictures of flags and tanks, of Saddam's smiling face, often with doves flying above it. In some schools, students were asked to write letters of praise. They recited poems. They sang songs, carefully choreographed, at school events, all recorded and sometimes broadcast on state TV. It might have seemed harmless, patriotic, even sweet. But the intention ran deeper. This was not just schooling, it was shaping. And behind it all, the Ba'ath Party loomed, not only as a political force but as a part of life itself. Children were encouraged to join youth wings, where discipline and loyalty were rewarded. Those who excelled in loyalty could be fast-tracked to elite schools, or invited to national rallies, or photographed with a smiling party official. The line between childhood and citizenship blurred quickly. Imagine a child returning home from school. Their backpack is heavy with books, some real, some symbolic. In their hand, a paper decorated with Saddam's face. They give it to their mother, who smiles softly, and hides the unease that flickers in her eyes. She praises the drawing, not because she believes, but because she must. Because the regime reached into every home, through every child. Even play was not free of it. Toy guns were common. Uniforms made to resemble soldiers were worn with pride. Stories shared between children often mirrored the ones they'd heard on television. Tales of enemies defeated, of Saddam's courage, of Iraq's eternal strength. In sleep, they sometimes dreamed of battlefields they had never seen, but which felt familiar, almost comforting. But not all children lived equally beneath the shadow of the state. In Kurdish areas, in the south, in Shia communities, the messages were often colder, the presence of the state more threatening than nurturing. In these places, children learned a different kind of caution. Their books still carried the same images, but their parents warned them, never say the wrong thing, never speak of what you hear at home, never, ever repeat a joke. And so childhood became something more fragile. Playgrounds were still filled with laughter, but it was laughter with boundaries. Friendships formed, but often with unspoken rules. And even within the innocence of youth, many children carried the knowledge that their words could echo far beyond the schoolyard walls. Still, life found its rhythms. There were birthdays, school trips, exams, the smell of ink and dust in crowded libraries, the hush of test days, and always the presence of the state, not as a distant power, but as a quiet, ever-present companion in every lesson, every pledge, every morning chant. For many children, Saddam was the only leader they had ever known. He was not just on the posters. He was in their poems, their prayers, their dreams. And even now, long after those schoolbooks have faded, those classrooms carry the faint echo of young voices, pledging allegiance, eyes fixed forward, hearts shaped by a system that did not allow questioning. As these children grew, they became young men and women. Some became soldiers, others students. Some resisted, others obeyed. But all of them, in one way or another, carried with them the lessons of that time. And soon, many of them would be swept into a tide far larger than schoolbooks or slogans. They would be called to serve, to fight, to disappear. Let us now drift gently into the long, grinding echo of war, and the silence that followed so many of its sons. And so the children of the Ba'ath became men, or were asked to, too soon. In September 1980, as summer gave way to the dry winds of autumn, Iraq launched an invasion across its eastern border. The target was Iran. its new revolutionary regime seen as a threat by Saddam Hussein. What followed was not a swift military campaign, but 8 long years of war. A war with no clear victor, a war that bled into every corner of Iraqi life. It began with parades and proclamations. State media painted it as a righteous stand. Saddam appeared often on television, wearing military uniform, declaring Iraq's strength, Iraq's courage, Iraq's destiny. Boys cheered in classrooms, men enlisted, some willingly, others not. The country's ancient rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, now whispered alongside supply trucks and the marching of troops. But the glory faded quickly. The front lines solidified into stagnant trenches. Mud, barbed wire and boredom gave way to shelling and gas attacks. It was a war of artillery and attrition, a war where soldiers stood for hours in waterlogged ditches under grey skies, waiting for the next barrage, waiting for orders that rarely made sense, waiting to die or not. Imagine a mother in Basra. She hears a knock at the door, not at midnight this time, but mid-morning. A man in uniform. He hands her a box. There are no words exchanged. Inside her son's uniform, folded neatly, clean, too clean. His name is not spoken again. This was the rhythm of the war. Names were called at school assemblies, students gone, some returned in crutches, others in wooden boxes, and many, far too many, never returned at all. They became silhouettes in photographs or stories whispered over tea. Martyrs, the state called them. But to their families, they were sons, brothers, husbands. Laughter silenced, futures erased. In cities far from the front, life reshaped itself. Rationing became a part of the daily routine. Long queues formed for basic goods. Bread, sugar, rice. The rhythm of domestic life now synchronized with war broadcasts and state declarations. And always, propaganda. Everywhere there were posters of Saddam in uniform. His speeches aired again and again. Even the music on the radio swelled with militaristic pride. Children sang songs about victory, about bravery, about sacrifice. They didn't always understand the words, but they understood the silence that came after. And beneath it all, beneath the speeches, the marches, the official photographs, was exhaustion. 8 years is a long time, enough time for a boy to grow into a soldier, for a newlywed to become a widow, for parents to forget the sound of a son's voice, enough time for an entire generation to carry scars that couldn't be seen. Chemical weapons were used, on both sides, but it was Iraqi civilians, particularly in border towns, who often bore the price. Villages were emptied, fields scorched, and the wind carried whispers of toxins no one could name. Still, the war continued, because it had to, because turning back would mean weakness, because pride, once weaponized, is difficult to put down. By 1988, a ceasefire was agreed. There was no celebration, no grand announcement of peace, just a quiet stop, a pause, a moment when the guns finally were still. But the silence was not peace. It was a silence filled with ghosts. Saddam declared victory. State television ran montages of smiling soldiers and waving flags. Medals were handed out, streets renamed. But the people, those who had waited and wept and lost, knew the truth. There were no winners, only survivors. Imagine a woman hanging laundry in the courtyard of her home. The sun above, the clothes damp and heavy. She looks toward the horizon. The silence feels different now. Not safer, not lighter, just different. Behind her, a photograph rests on a shelf. A young man in uniform, his eyes fixed forward, forever 19, and yet, life resumed, slowly, uncertainly. The markets reopened. Schools welcomed students again. People laughed, carefully, but always, the shadow of war lingered. In the empty chairs at dinner, in the faces aged too quickly, in the way the wind moved through quiet alleyways at dusk. This was Iraq after the war. Not free, not healed, but enduring. And while soldiers returned, or didn't, it was often the women who carried the weight of what was lost. Their grief was private, their strength, quiet, their resilience, unseen. Let us now walk softly into the stillness they held, the silence they bore. into the hearts of mothers who smiled, because anything else would have been far too dangerous. Imagine, if you will, a modest home in a southern Iraqi town. The walls are thin, the curtains faded, a pot simmers on the stove, lentils perhaps, and in the next room, a single photograph rests atop a lace-covered shelf. The young man in the picture wears a pressed uniform, his face youthful and proud, yet untouched by the sorrow that followed. His mother, seated nearby, quietly sews a patch into her husband's shirt. The television is on, as always, playing another speech, another song, another reminder of what must not be said. She does not cry. Not today. In Saddam Hussein's Iraq, grief was not something to be performed, especially not a grief that questioned the state. Instead, it was folded, gently, into the fabric of daily life, worn like a second skin. These were the women who survived the war not in trenches but in kitchens, not with rifles but with silence, their husbands conscripted, their sons buried in unmarked graves, their daughters learning to smile without asking too many questions. These mothers learned the delicate art of enduring, of bearing sorrow invisibly, of pretending for the sake of the family that everything was fine. There were no support groups, no grief counsellors. There was only resilience, the quiet, dignified kind. The kind that sits across from an empty seat at dinner and still serves food for 5. In Saddam's Iraq, to speak of the dead with anything but official reverence was dangerous. If a mother questioned how her son died, or why he had been sent to the front with inadequate equipment, or why his body never returned, she could be accused of disloyalty, of sedition. So instead, she whispered her mourning into laundry lines, into silent prayers before dawn, into the soil of family gardens. It was a grief shared in glances, in the trembling of a lip quickly composed, in the way she pressed a hand to a child's back, just a moment longer than necessary. State television filled the silence with songs about heroism, about sacrifice, about the honour of dying for Iraq. But in quiet corners of the home, mothers remembered the real stories. The phone calls cut short, the letters that never arrived, the dreams that woke them in the night, dreams where their sons stood in the doorway, whole again. The regime praised these women as the backbone of the nation. It paraded their sacrifices on national holidays. But the praise came wrapped in expectation. Smile, endure, don't ask, don't doubt. Some did speak quietly behind closed doors. They gathered in kitchens, at water pumps, outside school gates. There, their grief found shape in murmurs, cautious, clipped. They asked about each other's sons. They exchanged details, locations, rumours of mass graves, and then just as quickly they changed the subject. A neighbour could be listening. A passerby could report them. Even widows were watched. Their pensions could be revoked for a stray comment. Their homes inspected without warning. A child's question at school, innocent, curious, could bring the mukhabarat to the door. So they learned to live with absence, to wake in the night and reach for a face that was no longer there, to bite their tongues when propaganda played over breakfast, to teach their children to forget, or at least to pretend they had. And yet, there was strength in this silence. It was not weakness that kept them quiet. It was love, protective, fierce, unwavering. These women bore the weight of memory so their families could keep breathing. They became guardians of stories unspoken, names unlisted, truths unacknowledged. Imagine a small drawer, hidden beneath folded blankets. Inside, a stack of letters from the front, a military ID, a pressed flower from the last walk before enlistment. These were the keepsakes of memory, not displayed, but not discarded, a quiet rebellion against forgetting. Years later, even long after Saddam's fall, many mothers still speak in hushed tones, their habits formed in those years of fear, their grief calcified by time, their silence, once protective, now simply a way of being. And still, in the backrooms of Iraq's weathered homes, their stories live on, passed gently from mother to daughter, between the rolling of dough and the stirring of tea. So as we leave their doorsteps behind, let us carry that silence with us, a silence rich with meaning, a silence that says, I loved, I lost, I endured. Now, from these hushed kitchens, let us drift northward, to a different kind of silence, not in the hearts of women, but in the valleys once filled with Kurdish voices. where entire villages were erased not by time but by design. Imagine a quiet mountain morning in northern Iraq. The air is thin and crisp. Dew clings to the tips of wild grasses. Smoke rises lazily from a stone chimney, curling into a soft blue sky. Chickens peck near the door of a small earth-coloured home. Children laugh as they fetch water from the stream. This could be any Kurdish village, nestled in the Zagros Mountains, where the rhythm of life is marked not by clocks but by seasons. But that morning was long ago, because today, if you were to return to that same hillside, you might find only rubble, crumbling walls swallowed by brush, footpaths that lead to nowhere, perhaps a rusted pail or a scorched sandal resting silently where it was dropped, a ghost village emptied by decree. Between 1986 and 1989, during what became known as the Unveil campaign, the Iraqi government carried out a systematic effort to eliminate Kurdish resistance, and by extension, the Kurdish presence in parts of Iraq. Anfal, meaning the spoils in Arabic, was a name drawn from the Quran. But in this context, it became a euphemism for destruction. Entire communities were uprooted, families separated, villages flattened by bulldozers, bombed from the sky, or simply set ablaze. The countryside, once dotted with homes, schools and mosques, was rendered eerily empty. More than 4,000 Kurdish villages were destroyed. Tens of thousands of civilians, men, women and children, vanished into prisons, military trucks and unmarked graves. Others were relocated to collective camps, often little more than fenced-in slums far from the mountains they had called home. In many of these cases, no warning was given. One day, villagers awoke to the sound of helicopters or the distant rumble of tanks. Soldiers arrived swiftly, barking orders. Families were told to gather their things. Sometimes they were given minutes, sometimes nothing at all. And then the homes were gone, not just burned but erased, stone by stone. Wells were filled in, orchards were cut down, cemeteries desecrated. It was not merely a military campaign. It was an attempt to remove a people from place, memory and geography. Those who survived were deposited in settlements with sterile names. Model villages, the regime called them, rows of concrete blocks laid out with militaristic precision. They had no gardens, no livestock, no identity, just grey walls, watchtowers nearby, and the constant surveillance of state authorities. For the displaced, it was more than just the loss of shelter, it was the loss of ancestry. You see, Kurdish identity is intimately tied to the land, to the contours of hills, the flow of rivers, the scent of apricots in spring. To lose the village was to lose the past, and for many it was also to lose language, song and the rituals that knit generations together. Some villagers were told their relatives had been relocated. In reality, many were executed in deserts or mass burial sites, their names never officially recorded. Survivors, mostly women and children, were left to guess at fates they would never confirm. And yet, some still remember. Old men with folded maps tucked inside coat pockets. Grandmothers who sing lullabies in dialects now fading. Children born in displacement camps who know the names of villages they've never seen. Passed down like heirlooms, repeated like prayers. If you travel these northern regions today, you may stumble upon the remains of these ghost cities. A half-buried stone oven, the outline of a school wall, a fig tree miraculously still growing in what was once a courtyard. Some families have returned, building new homes near the ruins. Others visit only in memory, or in stories told around nighttime fires. These places, though officially erased, live on in the hearts of those who once called them home. And in the spring, when the snow melts from the mountains, wildflowers still bloom across the abandoned fields, as if the earth itself remembers what was lost. Now, as we leave behind these hushed, invisible cities, still echoing with the lives they once held, we return to the ever-watchful gaze of Saddam himself. For in the minds of many Iraqis his presence was constant, his likeness uncanny, and in some places he seemed to appear in two places at once. Imagine walking through a market in Baghdad. The air is heavy with the scent of grilled lamb, petrol and dust. A radio crackles in the background with a patriotic song, and there he is, Saddam Hussein, waving solemnly from a poster above the bakery. A few blocks later he's there again, in a different outfit, a slightly different pose. At a government building, a hospital lobby, even in a school hallway. The same mustachioed face, the same confident gaze. But sometimes, people whispered that it wasn't always him. There were moments, uncanny moments, when those who worked closest to the regime began to notice small inconsistencies. A slightly different gait, a left-handed wave, a tone of voice not quite right, an earlobe perhaps not quite the same. You see, in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the president was more than a man. He was an image, a myth, and myths cannot be everywhere at once. But images can. It is widely believed, and confirmed by several former insiders after the fall of the regime, that Saddam employed multiple doubles or body doubles, men trained to mimic his every mannerism, posture, and cadence. These lookalikes were used to attend lower-risk public events, to stand in for him during periods of ill health, or simply to create the illusion that Saddam was omnipresent. In a country where plots to assassinate the president were not uncommon, this tactic added a layer of confusion, protection, and fear. Would-be attackers could never be certain if the man they saw was truly him. The process of selecting a double was intense. Candidates were often chosen from military or tribal circles, men whose facial features bore even a passing resemblance to Saddam's. Through surgery, grooming, voice coaching, and months, sometimes years, of training, they were transformed. They studied videos of the real Saddam, practicing his walk, his expressions, his famously stern pauses between words. Even the president's own guards at times were not told whether they were protecting the original or the imitation. And to the average Iraqi watching the nightly news, it made no difference. The message was clear. He is everywhere, always, watching. This omnipresence was not just visual, it was psychological. Children sang songs to him at school assemblies. His name was invoked at weddings, in prayers, in newspaper editorials. Government employees kept framed photos of him on their desks, not out of affection necessarily, but as a precaution. To not display his image was a dangerous omission. Saddam even once published a romantic novel under a pseudonym, and it was quietly passed around as though it were a sacred text. The people were not meant to know whether he had written it or not. The ambiguity was the point. The lines between reality and performance, between man and myth, blurred. And so, in that blurring, the doubles played their part. Their identities were never confirmed, their names never officially released. Rumours persisted that one or two were executed after making missteps. A word spoken too casually, a movement too stiff, but no records remain. Like everything under the regime, the truth is wrapped in fog. Even today, some Iraqis wonder whether the man they saw wave at a parade decades ago was truly Saddam, or just a well-practiced stand-in, moving through crowds like a ghost wearing flesh. It's a strange legacy, one that speaks to the core of dictatorship, the desire not merely to be powerful but to be unavoidable, to turn a single human face into a symbol of eternity. But no illusion lasts forever, and so, from the carefully orchestrated doubles, we drift next into the echo of a place that bore only one version of reality, his version. A place where the presence of Saddam wasn't a likeness, but a force. Where even children were sculpted into loyal followers before they could form independent thoughts of their own. Nestled in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan lies the town of Halabja. A quiet place, surrounded by rolling hills and orchards, where the wind carries the scent of wild herbs and distant wood smoke. Once it was just another dot on the map, a town of families, farmers and children who played in the dusty courtyards while their mothers kneaded bread and fathers worked the land. But in March of 1988, Halabja became something else. The Iran-Iraq war was nearing its brutal end, and the Kurdish people, long marginalised, had become pawns in a greater geopolitical game. Many Kurds seeking autonomy and safety aligned themselves with Iran. Saddam's regime viewed this not simply as betrayal, but as treason. And treason, under Saddam, did not go unanswered. On the 16th of March, Iraqi planes flew over Halabja. At first, residents believed it was yet another conventional bombardment, a routine horror, if such a thing could be said to exist. But this time, the bombs released something else. The skies let fall a silent fog, not fire, not metal, but a quiet, invisible killer. Chemical weapons, a blend of mustard gas, sarin and other nerve agents just descended on the town. There was no warning, no escape. People ran into cellars, into mosques, into the open streets, trying to understand what was happening. But the gas followed the wind. It slipped beneath doors, clung to the ground, and wrapped itself around every living thing. The town went still. Photographs taken days later show scenes too haunting to describe fully. Children lying beside parents, eyes open, unblinking. Entire families frozen in positions of flight, as though caught mid-breath. The trees still stood, the buildings still stood, but the life within them had been quieted. An estimated 5,000 people died in a single day. Thousands more were injured, scarred physically and emotionally. Those who survived carried with them coughs that never left, skin that blistered in the sun, and memories that never softened. Even now, decades later, the people of Halabja speak of that day in murmurs, not just because it was painful, but because the world did not listen. At first, the attack was buried beneath layers of denial and indifference. The global community, caught in the web of Cold War politics, offered only silence. It would be years before full acknowledgement came. By then, the damage had been done, and in the soil of Halabja the chemicals lingered. Today, there is a memorial museum in the town. Its halls are cool and quiet. Names are etched into plaques. Photographs line the walls. A room displays the clothes of those who died. Small shirts, sandals, a mother's scarf. It is not a place of noise or outrage. It is a place of witnessing. For the people of Halabja, the memory is not just historical, it is personal. Every family has a name they whisper before bed, a face they remember from before the gas came, and yet, life continues. Children now play in the streets again. Markets hum softly. The apple trees bear fruit. But the air carries an old heaviness. Not the scent of gas, but the weight of what happened. It is a scar not visible to the eye, but etched deeply into the breath of the town itself. As we leave Halabja, we are reminded of the fragility of peace and how quickly a town can be turned from home to headline, and then forgotten. And as the sorrow of Halabja settles into quiet memory, we travel now to the heart of contradiction, to the shimmering illusion of prosperity that stood in stark contrast to such suffering. For while Halabja mourned, the skyline of Baghdad gleamed with gold and power. Imagine yourself driving along the wide avenues of central Baghdad in the late 1980s. The sun gleams against marble facades and the golden domes of freshly built government buildings. Palm trees line the streets. There are fountains, ornamental gates, and rows of statues, many of them bearing the likeness of one man. His arm raised, his smile etched in bronze. It looks, on the surface, like a city of prosperity. And in a sense, it was. Iraq, after all, sat upon one of the world's largest oil reserves. Billions of barrels beneath its deserts, fueling not only global demand but also Saddam Hussein's vision of a modern Arab empire. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, oil money flowed into Iraq like a steady river. The state built roads, highways, factories and cultural centres. There were schools, sports stadiums, and even attempts at nuclear development. The government boasted of high literacy rates, modern healthcare, and a powerful military machine. Television programs showcased gleaming infrastructure, while state media hailed Iraq as the rising jewel of the Arab world. But not all that glitters is gold. Behind the marble columns and beneath the posters of national pride, many Iraqis, especially in rural areas, saw little of this wealth. While Saddam's regime invested heavily in showcase projects, the needs of everyday citizens often remained unmet. In the countryside, villagers struggled with poor sanitation, unreliable electricity and crumbling roads. Hospitals, even in cities, lacked basic supplies. Schools were overcrowded and under-resourced, and for many families, the dream of a better life felt as distant as the moon. Meanwhile, Baghdad's elite basked in opulence. Saddam commissioned the construction of numerous palaces, more than 70 by some estimates. These sprawling complexes, often guarded and hidden from the public eye, included private cinemas, man-made lakes, and halls of imported Italian marble. Some were replicas of historic sites, others expressions of grandeur for grandeur's sake. One such palace, perched on a hill overlooking the Tigris River, offered panoramic views of a city that, by then, had become both spectacle and stage. Beneath it, the people queued for ration cards. Inside it, banquets were held under chandeliers the size of small boats. This contrast, between luxury and lack, became the architecture of Saddam's rule. He understood the power of illusion. Public works projects were often launched with great fanfare and then abandoned. Construction sites filled the capital, but many were facades. Shells of buildings meant more for the camera than the citizen. Even when projects were completed, they served symbolic purposes more than practical ones. The oil money, rather than being used to uplift the nation as a whole, often flowed toward reinforcing loyalty. Generals were rewarded with lavish homes. Tribal leaders were granted vehicles, farms, or cash. Even singers and poets who praised Saddam publicly found themselves elevated to national fame, with comfortable lives carved out by decree. This form of patronage, deeply woven into the regime, created a society where proximity to power meant survival and distance meant struggle. And yet, the state continued to insist that all was well. Television broadcasts showed gleaming oil rigs, fields of wheat, and smiling children in new uniforms. They did not show the power outages that darkened homes for hours each day, nor the mothers who stood in bread lines at dawn. They did not show the teachers who hadn't been paid in months, or the doctors forced to reuse supplies. Even within Baghdad, the illusion was inconsistent. One could pass from a grand boulevard into a crumbling neighborhood within minutes, a place where buildings leaned tiredly into each other, where the streets were cracked and muddy after rain, and where satellite dishes perched atop old rooftops, silent, watching, disconnected. Still, dissent was unthinkable. To speak openly of these disparities was not only discouraged, it was dangerous. People learned to smile in public and complain only in whispers. The illusion had to be maintained not just for the regime, but for the safety of those who lived beneath its gaze. Oil had bought weapons, it had bought palaces, it had bought silence, but it could not buy trust. Nor could it erase the quiet bitterness that grew in homes where children slept hungry, while golden statues of Saddam rose into the sky. And so, as the oil burned beneath Iraq's soil, the people above it lived lives both illuminated and obscured, like shadows cast by flickering torchlight. As we drift onward, we leave behind these glittering facades and the wealth that served the few. Ahead lies a quieter kind of loss, not measured in gold or blood, but in words. Words once spoken in poems, in stories, in songs. Words that, in Saddam's Iraq, became dangerous things. Imagine a young man sitting beneath a flickering lamp in a Baghdad apartment. It's midnight. The city outside is quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against the windows. He holds a worn notebook in his lap. In it, verses swirl like wind through broken trees. They speak of longing, of hunger, of injustice, but they never say those words aloud, because to name the truth was to risk everything. In the early years of Saddam Hussein's rule, there was still a whisper of cultural breath. Iraq had once been a land of poets, storytellers, and intellectuals. Baghdad had been the literary heart of the Arab world, its bookstores bustling, its cafes full of philosophers and dreamers. But as the Ba'ath Party tightened its grip, those once vibrant voices began to vanish. Censorship in Saddam's Iraq was not merely a policy, it was a system of fear. Every manuscript, every article, every film script passed through the hands of state censors. Words were not merely edited, they were neutered, reshaped, or erased entirely. Writers who dared to question, even in metaphor, found their work buried, or worse, found themselves buried too. Some disappeared without a trace, others were arrested under vague charges, subversion, insulting the leadership, undermining national morale. A single misplaced phrase, a subtle critique tucked in the folds of fiction, could result in torture or silence that never ended. The regime favoured poetry that praised Saddam, stories that glorified the Ba'athist vision, and essays that declared eternal loyalty. Writers were coerced into producing flattering content. Some complied, writing odes to the leader's supposed wisdom, others refused and vanished. Libraries once filled with diverse thought became carefully curated showcases. Shelves were swept clean of dissenting voices, banned books disappeared overnight, and foreign literature was heavily restricted. The works of distant authors could only survive in memory, in whispers, or in exile. Those who could flee did. Iraqi intellectuals scattered across the globe, forming a quiet diaspora of displaced minds. But those who remained learned to encode their truths in metaphor, to turn protest into parable, to bury meaning beneath layers of allegory. Imagine a playwright scripting a story about birds in a gilded cage, a simple tale on the surface. But in Baghdad's theatres, the audience would nod knowingly. They understood the cage, they lived in it. And then there were those who kept writing in secret. Poets who scribbled verses on scraps and hid them beneath floorboards. Journalists who wrote under pseudonyms, smuggling stories to foreign outlets. Painters who layered protest beneath strokes of abstraction. Creativity did not vanish, it retreated. It whispered. It survived by becoming quieter, cleverer, more cautious. Even so, the price was always risk. Families of dissident artists were targeted. Children were punished for the words of their parents. Entire lineages silenced because of a single book, a single sentence. The regime understood something deeply chilling, that language shapes thought, and thought leads to dissent, so it sought to erase dangerous language at the root. In classrooms, students recited carefully approved literature. Saddam was portrayed as a poet, a thinker, a saviour. His words were treated with reverence, carved into stone, printed in textbooks. No room was left for alternative narratives, and yet in the quiet people remembered. They remembered the old poems, the ones passed down by grandparents, written before the censors came. They remembered songs that once played freely on the radio. They remembered names, of authors, of professors, of journalists, who once spoke boldly and then disappeared. That memory became its own form of resistance. It lingered in quiet cafes where old men quoted lines they could not write. It survived in bedtime stories told in hushed tones that hinted at truths without naming them. It lived in the margins of notebooks, in songs hummed beneath breath, in eyes that met across a room with unspoken understanding. And today, long after the pages were burned and the pens were broken, the memory of those forbidden words still stirs. For even under a regime that feared the very idea of free thought, the human spirit, quiet, persistent, and gentle, found ways to endure. Now, let us move from the world of ideas to the realm of hunger, illness, and invisible suffering. As the 1990s dawned, Iraq entered a new chapter, one shaped not by bombs or bullets, but by absence. The silence was no longer enforced by the state alone, but by the weight of the world. The year is 1991, the Gulf War has ended, smoke still curls from the oil fields, cities lie in various states of disrepair, but it is not just the dust of war that settles over Iraq, it is something quieter, heavier, more enduring. It is the weight of sanctions. In the wake of Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, the international community responded with a sweeping set of economic sanctions. The goal was to weaken the regime, to pressure compliance, to curb future aggression. But as the years stretched on, the impact of these sanctions unfolded in ways few had predicted, or perhaps too few had cared to imagine. Imagine yourself in a Baghdad pharmacy in the mid-1990s. The room is dim, the shelves are half empty. Behind the counter, a weary pharmacist turns away another mother. Her son needs insulin, but the shipment hasn't arrived in months. Outside, the line stretches down the street. People clutch faded prescriptions like prayers. Hospitals became places of heartbreak. Once among the most advanced in the region, Iraq's healthcare system was brought to its knees. Essential medicines, antibiotics, cancer treatments, even basic anesthetics became rare or vanished entirely. Doctors sterilized equipment with boiling water. Surgeries were postponed or performed under terrifying conditions. Infant mortality soared, malnutrition became commonplace, and always the sense that help might be just out of reach, behind some invisible wall. In kitchens across Iraq, the dinner table changed. Gone were the lavish dishes once common in Iraqi households, the fragrant lamb stews, the spiced rice, the generous platters of vegetables and bread. In their place, powdered milk, lentils, often just tea and a small rationed portion of rice or flour. The Iraqi dinar collapsed in value. Inflation ran wild. Families who once lived comfortably found themselves selling furniture, jewellery, even heirlooms, anything to buy another week's worth of food. Teachers took second jobs as taxi drivers. Engineers waited in line for subsidised bread. A shadow economy blossomed. Smugglers crossed borders by night. Black markets thrived in alleyways and hidden shops. Some Iraqis found ways to profit, but most simply struggled to survive. Corruption deepened. Those connected to the regime gained first access to scarce goods. The rest waited. And through it all, the propaganda machine turned. State television continued to portray Saddam as a strong, compassionate leader. Programs blamed the West for Iraq's suffering, and to many this wasn't difficult to believe. They saw the consequences with their own eyes, the isolation, the sickness, the hunger, all while palaces gleamed untouched. But in truth, both forces bore responsibility. The regime that stockpiled wealth and refused transparency. The international powers that imposed sweeping sanctions, knowing they would fall heaviest on the poor, the elderly, the children. Imagine being a parent during this time, watching your child's growth falter, visiting the market and returning with half of what you need, writing letters to family overseas, hoping they can send medicine or money, and always that question in the quiet hours: how long can this go on? Yet Iraqis, as they always have, adapted. Neighbours shared what little they had. Communal kitchens opened in some districts. Teachers continued to teach without pay. Doctors showed up day after day, knowing their tools were broken but still trying. And in some homes, amid flickering lights and whispered conversations, people began to dream of change. Not loudly, not in public, but quietly, in the dark. By the late 1990s, an entire generation had grown up under the weight of these sanctions. For them, this was normal. Ration cards, dim clinics, endless waiting. A childhood shaped not by school trips or toys, but by survival. Even today, many remember that era not with anger alone, but with a deep weariness, as if the years themselves were heavy, slow-moving like walking through water, and so the shadow of the sanctions lingered, not as a single moment, but as a long, dull ache, a constant presence, not violent, but quietly corrosive. Now, let us move from the flickering stoves and ration lines of ordinary homes to the sleepless city itself, the ancient capital that once sparkled with culture and light. For even in the heart of Baghdad, sleep became a luxury. When we return, we'll wander through the restless streets of a city that forgot how to rest. The last call to prayer drifts across the rooftops, its echoes mingling with the low drone of generators. Daylight has surrendered, but darkness brings no true rest. Street lamps flicker and die, one by one, as another power cut rolls across the capital. In a small apartment near the old city walls, a family gathers in the single room that still holds a bit of breeze. Windows are flung open to coax in any whisper of cool air. Curtains billow like slow-moving ghosts. A kerosene lantern casts gentle halos on the plaster. Outside, the hum of portable generators blends with distant traffic, an uneven lullaby of sputtering engines and tired horns. On some nights, the sky itself seems to hold its breath. But the residents remember other nights, not so long ago, when sudden flashes appeared on the horizon. The Gulf War's bright, brutal signatures. Sirens wailed, dogs howled, and anti-aircraft tracers stitched orange seams through the dark. Families pressed mattress against wall, whispered prayers, waited for the thunder that followed the light. Even now, years later, when an engine backfires or a transformer pops, shoulders tense before minds can reason. Yet sleeplessness is not only the legacy of bombs, it is the ache of heat trapped inside concrete walls when the electricity fails for the 7th time that day. It is the rattle of shutters in a sand-laden wind, the insistent buzz of mosquitoes gathering around a single candle. It is fathers carrying beds to flat rooftops so children can lie beneath the stars, hoping the night air will cool their skin while they dream uneasy, half-waking dreams. Some nights pulse with hidden life. In back alleys, black market traders unload crates of powdered milk and spare generator parts. Their voices stay low, but their eyes shine. Small flashes of opportunity in a strangled economy. Farther downtown, in a shuttered cafe, 3 university students sip sweet tea brewed over a camping stove. They recite verses from forbidden poets, each line softer than the last, ears tuned for footsteps on the stair. And always there is the possibility of a knock. Tires roll slowly over gravel, headlights cut across a courtyard. Someone holds their breath as fists drum against a metal door. Perhaps it is only a neighbour in need. Perhaps not. In this city, everyone has learned to listen first, speak later. The Tigris drifts on, indifferent, sliding beneath bridges named for victories no one believes in anymore. Its dark surface mirrors the presidential palaces. Monoliths aglow even during outages, their facades reflected like bright promises on black water. From a distance they look eternal, yet the night breeze carries the smell of diesel and damp earth, reminders that nothing lasts forever. There are softer sounds too, a grandmother's stories told by lantern light of calmer decades when musicians played late into the evening on Rashid Street, the creak of a date palm frond against a garden wall, the chorus of crickets rising in an abandoned lot. These small, persistent notes weave a counter-melody to dread, proof that life endures between blackouts and curfews. Toward dawn, Baghdad dozes rather than sleeps. Roosters call from patched-together coops. A muezzin's voice climbs the humid air. Vendors push carts into streets still cooled by night. Children stir on rooftops, blinking at the pale sky, uncertain whether the brief hush was a dream or another fragment of waking life. For in this city, slumber is rarely deep. It is a light, vigilant rest, one ear open for sirens, one eye half aware of silhouettes in the stairwell. Baghdad learned, over decades, to live between beats of the heart, between flickers of the bulb, between moments of noise and the long stretches of uneasy quiet. And so, as the capital keeps its restless vigil, we drift farther west, to the outskirts where thick concrete walls once encircled Iraq's most feared prison, a place where night was never dark enough to hide the cries that rose from within. Imagine, if you will, a prison unlike any other, not simply a building, but a symbol, a sealed world where the regime's grip tightened to its most ruthless degree. Abu Ghraib, long before it entered global headlines in later years, was already a place marked by dread. The compound lies west of Baghdad, surrounded by watchtowers that scan the horizon with unblinking eyes. Thick walls topped with coils of razor wire enclose a maze of cell blocks and interrogation chambers. Inside, the air is dense still, as if time itself hesitates within these boundaries. By day, sunlight filters through narrow barred windows, casting long stripes of pale light on cracked floors. But the shadows hold more: whispered names, silenced voices, memories that refuse to fade. Prisoners arrive from every corner of the country: political dissidents, suspected rebels, members of ethnic minorities, anyone deemed a threat to Saddam's rule. Some came under accusations barely whispered in daylight. Others were swept up in the regime's endless purges, their fates sealed long before their arrival. Inside, the routine was merciless in its monotony. Hours stretched into days filled with waiting for interrogations, for movement, for any sign of reprieve. The floors were cold stone, the walls stained with time and sorrow. Yet beyond the physical confines, the real weight was psychological. Neighbours became enemies. Trust was a dangerous luxury. The secret police, the Mukhabarat, operated invisibly even here. Informants hidden among prisoners, their words shaping destinies in silence. Though the regime's methods were brutal, we avoid dwelling on harsh details. Instead, we acknowledge the quiet toll, the countless lives worn thin by fear and isolation, the families left in endless uncertainty, the slow erosion of hope. At night, the sounds of Abu Ghraib changed. The city's distant murmurs faded. The compound was filled instead with hushed conversations, footsteps on stone corridors, and the occasional sharp command. Outside, stars blinked indifferently above. The prison was a place where many lives were quietly extinguished, where the price of dissent was not only physical disappearance, but the erasure of identity and voice. Yet even here, resilience found a way. Prisoners exchanged stories in whispered codes. Some memorized poetry, others recited prayers. Small acts of humanity persisted, flickering like candlelight in the deepest darkness. As the years passed, Abu Ghraib became a grim symbol of the regime's reach, an unyielding reminder that for many the boundaries of fear stretched beyond the streets and homes into the very walls meant to protect. From this place of shadows, we move back into the light of the cities and towns where life, though burdened, continued to pulse. Next, we'll explore the simmering unrest in southern Iraq, the hopes, the uprisings, and the crushing aftermath that echoed through the years. Imagine the early spring of 1991. The Gulf War's guns have fallen silent, and the dust from retreating armies settles over a land weary yet restless. In the southern cities, among the palm-lined streets of Basra and the smaller towns dotting the marshlands, whispers of change grow louder. For many Shia Iraqis, Long marginalized under Saddam Hussein's Sunni-dominated regime, this moment feels like a fragile chance, a window opening for voices long suppressed. The air is thick with cautious optimism. People gather quietly in marketplaces and mosques. Children watch from doorways as their elders speak in hushed tones about freedom, about justice, about the possibility of a new dawn. Yet the regime's response is swift and unforgiving. Military vehicles roar through streets that only days before had carried the scent of jasmine and freshly baked bread. Soldiers in olive drab move methodically, their faces masked in determination and cold resolve. The uprisings, sparked by decades of grievance and fueled by the Gulf War's chaos, are met with overwhelming force. The riverbanks run thick with sorrow, though the water itself flows on, indifferent and steady. Mass arrests follow. Neighborhoods are sealed off. Families vanish into the night, swallowed by the machinery of repression. Mothers clutch photographs, their eyes searching for sons who never return. The marshes, with their reeds whispering in the breeze, become both refuge and prison. Villages disappear, replaced by the harsh lines of military outposts. The land remembers, its soil soaked not only with water but with grief. Throughout this time, hope struggles to survive beneath the weight of fear. The uprising's initial flicker is quickly smothered, leaving behind a landscape marked by loss and silence. Yet even in the darkest moments, the spirit of resilience endures. Songs are sung in secret gatherings. Stories passed down remind the community of their strength and history. As the sun sets over the palm groves and the call to prayer echoes softly across the rivers, the people carry the memory of this crushed hope, a quiet testament to endurance amid the harsh tides of history. From the marshes and uprisings, our journey continues to the homes and screens of ordinary Iraqis, their worlds shaped by the constant presence of fear and the regime's watchful eye. Imagine yourself in a modest home somewhere in Iraq today. The air is still, the soft light filtering through curtains touches objects steeped in memory. A photograph tucked beneath a mattress, a worn chair left empty, the faint scent of jasmine lingering from days long past. Life after Saddam's rule carries the weight of history, a burden not always spoken aloud but felt deeply in the spaces between words. Families live with shadows, empty spaces at gatherings where voices once were, silent reminders of loved ones lost or displaced. The trauma of decades unfolds quietly, woven into everyday moments. A mother's glance drifts toward the door, remembering a son who never returned. A grandfather's stories told in measured tones bridge past and present, keeping memories alive without stirring old pain too sharply. Communities rebuild slowly, their rhythms shaped by both resilience and grief. The streets, once echoes of conflict, hum again with the everyday. Children's laughter, the chatter of market stalls, the occasional distant call to prayer weaving through the evening air. Yet beneath this return to normalcy lies an undercurrent of silence, a collective remembering that holds on to the past even as it steps cautiously toward the future. As night deepens and the world grows quiet, you might find yourself reflecting on the journey we have shared tonight. From ration queues to ruined cities, from whispered fears to the courage of everyday lives, history's weight is heavy but also filled with moments of quiet endurance. Now, as you prepare to drift into sleep, let these stories rest gently in your mind, not as shadows to haunt, but as echoes to remind us of the fragility and strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a time and place, both distant and hauntingly close. If you feel moved, please share where and when you're watching from in the comments below. It helps us feel connected across the miles. A gentle like and subscribe would also be appreciated to help more souls find calm in these stories. May your night be peaceful and your dreams soft as the fading light. Good night.